our planet is going through a lot of changes. And we as people do not care for something that we don't have relationship with. So it also creates this space where we don't only connect with ourselves, but we also can connect with the land that's around us. And when we form these relationships, we start to really want to conserve these spaces. So it has a wider, broader benefit to it.
Hello, everyone. I'm Angela Rosa DiDonato.
And I'm Marian Leary.
And you're listening to Amplify Nursing, a Penn nursing podcast supported by the Pinola Fund for Innovation in Nursing.
Amplify Nursing features nurses who are leading the way in science, policy, and innovation.
Our guests defy stereotypes, define practice, and disrupt convention.
We highlight the breadth and depth of nursing influence on society by amplifying nurses who are pushing boundaries and breaking down barriers to build a new paradigm. Today on Amplify Nursing, we talk with Andrea Jaramillo, a hospice nurse, urban farmer, and certified forest therapy guide who founded the company Forest Nurse. Forest Nurse aims to connect nature with humans by offering guided, intentional, and beautifully crafted forest therapy sessions in a reciprocal and relational manner. Forest therapy is an immersive nature experience that guides you on a gentle journey to reawaken your senses and connection with nature and self. In this episode, we discuss the physical and mental benefits of being in nature, the importance of connecting with and protecting our natural lands, and the seasonal changes that occur in nature which mirror the natural transitions of life. Andrea, I am so excited to have you on the Amplify Nursing podcast. I've actually been wanting to do it for a really long time. And then over the past couple of weeks, thinking about how nature has helped calm and relax me, I thought it'd be really great to have you on to talk about the work that you're doing.
Thank you so much, Marian. It is a privilege for me to be here, and thank you for holding this space for our conversation.
So, I would like for you to talk about the work that you're doing as the founder of Forest Nurse, what forest nursing is, and then we can get into the benefits of being in nature.
Sounds great. I will have to go to the beginning where, everything starts. I grew up in Ecuador, where the city where I was born is full of mountains surrounding me. And I grew up knowing that nature heals and knowing that nature is part of our systems of healing. And when I came to the United States, I was in cities, spaces where I didn't have a lot of access to green spaces, especially if I didn't have transportation, and working really, the schedules just doesn't allow a lot of times to be part of this. So life went on. I became a nurse. And as we know, nurses do get burnout. Part of my story. And while I was in those moments, I realized, I quit nursing for a couple of months to reassess where I was in my career and in my life. And I started going to urban farms near my area, where I was able to really connect with the land and remember the medicine that I was taught when I was a kid. And that was very powerful for me. And at that point, I encountered the Association of Nature and Forest Therapy. And they offered this certification for anybody. You don't have to be a nurse, but anybody can get certified. It's a 6-month training, a 4-day immersion, and it was a very profound experience for me, where I was going through the process of, acknowledging the land I was around with, reconnecting with myself, with my purpose, and really seeing the power that brings, So as a nurse, I think we're very well positioned to bring these practices into the mainstream, because I think a lot of times this is not accessible for a lot of people. I think there is a lot of evidence. So it is an evidence-based practice that we as nurses can disseminate in a very powerful way. We have trust in the community trusts us. Now, the systems do not offer accessibility, like health insurance does not cover this type of practices at this time, Some practices like acupuncture, they're starting to be covered by some insurances, but still there is not this accessibility portion of it. So at that point, I really wanted to create something that was very meaningful for my career, that other nurses could have access to the knowledge, and for my community to have this practice available. So that's when I created Forest Nurse. It's a baby company. It has 10 months. So it's still growing into what it will be in the future. I think I want this to grow very organically. I want also not to be part of this scale kind of booming. I think this has to be very organic with the community as it grows. How is it going to look like? What do people want? Do nurses want to learn about this? And should we create some kind of curriculum for nursing? Does the community want to know more about it? So, I'm in the exploring areas on this and joining people. So how does this look in a collective way,
So this is incredible. You know how much I love nurses as innovators and entrepreneurs. So I love that you're taking your love and connectiveness to nature, growing that into a business that can hopefully help other nurses and clients to really appreciate the benefits of the work that you're doing and the natural environment that we live in. And so I want to really set the stage for our listeners about why this is so important, right? We now spend over 90% of our time indoors as humans, which is a mind-blowing stat that I really hadn't ever considered. And, we know that nature is critical to supporting good mental health, good physical health. There's a list of benefits. So, can you share a little bit about the benefits that come from bathing in the forest, using the forest and nature in this way as therapy?
Yes. And thank you for the question. I think this particular practice was born in Japan because of critical, when the technological boom started in the 1980s, the government in Japan wanted to know how can people benefit from nature. So they started seeing a lot of benefits, and some of the evidence that you can see is, for example, there is some articles about cortisol levels being reduced in the saliva. There is some articles that talk about heart rate decreasing, blood pressure measurements. Interestingly, there is one that talks about increasing NK cells, the natural killer cells, which has been, which reduces the cancer cells in the body. So there is different types. Also, there is reports of feeling a sense of wellness, a sense of different types of emotions that are positive after a walk, and also not only just after, but it also stays for longer periods. There's some articles that talk about walking in cities versus walking in green spaces. They have been noticing that there is terpenes that are part of evergreens, that are molecules in the air that are able to do some of these benefits. So it's not just a walk, it's a more of the connection and the relationship with it. And you mentioned also, our planet is going through a lot of changes. And we as people do not care for something that we don't have relationship with. So it also creates this space where we don't only connect with ourselves, but we also can connect with the land that's around us. And when we form these relationships, we start to really want to conserve these spaces. So it has a wider, broader benefit to it, you know?
That is such a profound point, and something I think that needs to be highlighted, that connectiveness with nature, both as a benefit to us physically and mentally, but to our relationship with the planet as well. I love that point. And, there are so many studies, like you mentioned, highlighting the benefits of connecting with nature. People who are more connected with nature tend to be happier. I can attest to that. Every time I go out birding or hiking or just walking in nature, I am immediately less stressed and happier.
Yes, I agree with you.
I would love for you to talk us through what a session looks like if we were to come and do a session with you.
Yes, thank you. Usually a full session will take about 2.5 hours. We will meet, usually I do it in urban forests or arboretums, botanical gardens. So for me, it's important to be in the city, not too far. We don't have to go to the wilderness, even though that's also an option. And we would start with an introduction of what the history of this practice. We will acknowledge the land that we are on and the elements that accompany us, the beings that are with us in that moment. And we start with connecting with our senses because, we live in our heads a lot. That's what drives us crazy. So connecting back to our main five senses, touch, hearing, sight, smell, it's the first step to getting into this practice, So every guide will do it in a different way, but similar. And once we have finished that, we do a short walk that we do it together, but alone, where we will be noticing things around us. And that continues to be the practice of getting out of our monkey heads, right? Once we get to different spots that have been planned by your guide, we would be doing things that we call invitations. And these usually are prompts. And we call them invitations because there is really not right or wrong way to do it. It's an invitation to explore some part of where we are. These usually are crafted before the session starts, but sometimes guides see something in the area that catches their attention and catch an invitation, what we call. So sometimes it happens that way. Sometimes these invitations are done verbally, and sometimes we prepare scrolls that are little, pieces of paper that have a message inside that we might give to the participants. And in every time you send someone to do this prompt and come back, we will be sharing in a group. So the guide will be holding this space for share. Again, there's no right or wrong way to do it. And at the end of this, usually we do 3 of those invitations. We would have a tea ceremony where we share tea with the land and with each other to formalize the closure of the session. And at this point, we walk back together where our cars are. We say our goodbyes. And many times I think people have to go home to really have the profound experience, the complete profound experience to realize. So sometimes I get messages from our participants like, oh, when I did this, I felt this, things like that. Some people like to share it at the moment. Some people take it with them. And as a guide, we really open the doors to nature, but nature is who is doing the work with the person.
Yeah, it's really fascinating. I mean, I don't think people truly understand. It's really just about being in nature, observing, using all of your senses, building that relationship that has the benefit. You don't have to hike, you don't even have to walk around, essentially. You just need to sort of be there and take in the power that is the natural environment around you. It's really very powerful, I think.
Yes.
You mentioned that you focus on natural spaces in urban areas. I'm just curious why that is.
I think for me, particularly, I feel more connected to those spaces at this time. I think I have more access to those spaces so I can spend the time to build a relationship with the space. I think a lot of people are afraid of going to the wilderness. So I think this gives people accessibility to the space in a safe way. People tend to feel more comfortable in those spaces, especially if if they don't have the experience to go into the wilderness. So I think I have chosen those spaces because of those reasons.
So you also do urban farming. I will say the honey you gave me last year, I think it was the best honey I have ever had. And I've had a lot of honey. So thank you for that. Can you talk a little bit about what you do as an urban farmer and how your nursing lens might play a role in that space as well?
Yes. It goes back to connecting with food. Food is part of how we heal. It's still, it's part of it's an extension of my forest therapy, I would say. I don't only go to the forest, but I also take the forest in. And having relationship with the food I eat, with the bees that I take care of, has been a really profound experience because it's part of caring. I think why we are nurses and the way we see caring is very important for me. Is part of my identity. So I bring this identity to these spaces that might not be seen as nursing. I do think nursing is caring for the land. Not only that, but I have discovered that healthcare happens in many spaces. So when someone in the farm might hear I'm a nurse, we will have these very interesting conversations about chronic illness, what's happening in their environment, policies in our cities and our states that are challenging making their healthcare harder to access. So I think all of those things are healthcare, all of those things are nursing. So I think for me it's important. I don't work anymore in systems. I see patients in their homes as a hospice nurse. That's my clinical practice at this time. And I found that, if we centralize things in the system, it's one way. But if we bring people to these other natural spaces, to supermarkets, to where people are all the time, healthcare does happen there. So I think nurses should see how in their communities healthcare is happening, nursing is happening. It's just a different type of way of seeing it. We practice differently, more organically, more grassrooted kind of nursing.
I think it's really interesting that you're a hospice nurse. And I wonder if you see a connection between the forest therapy nursing you do and hospice nursing and how those might potentially interact.
So that's a very interesting question. And, I used to be a labor and delivery nurse, and now I'm a hospice nurse, which people say that's crazy.
It's full cycle.
It is the full cycle. And I love it because for me, caring is transitions and nature is transitions. It's all about cycles. It's all about honoring those moments. We live in eternal summer, right? We are producing. Our society wants us to produce, but when the winter comes and we have to slow down, it's a radical practice. right? It is a form of resistance to our current systems. So forest nursing, forest therapy, forest bathing gives us that moment of honoring a little bit of our winters, even if we are in the other seasons, because we slow down. So it's giving permission to the body to rest. It's giving permission to the mind to rest in a beautiful way. So I do see forest nursing to be this form of resistance, this form of radical offering to the people that are around me.
We are in a period of trying to understand the climate change and where we're going as a planet environmentally. What are your thoughts on how we as nurses can help our patients, clients, communities understand the importance of protecting the natural environments where we live?
Yeah. I think going back to relating to the environment, having that relationship, if you see someone in the street, that something happens, it's different that if you see your brother or sister struggling, right? So if you see the planet as your brother or your sister, you want to take care of it. You want to conserve it. If you spend time in nature, enough time, you see the changes. You see how the plants are blooming earlier. You see the rivers not having as much water as you saw it last year. So you start noticing the real changes before in front of your eyes. It's not just a story that was told to you, right? So I think the relationship part is fundamental to this caring of the planet.
And we know that most people aren't getting out into nature. And there has been some work about primary care providers prescribing nature for their patients. Do you think that should be done more as a way to encourage people to engage with the natural environments in their areas?
I think it's a great idea. I think recently I read, I think in Canada, they have the prescription of, it should be 30 minutes in nature, things like that. And maybe insurance is even covering for it. I am not 100% sure, but if that's the case, that will definitely provide a increase into these practices and for people to be able to do it. I had these ideas of, I started doing my practices on a Wednesday morning, things like that. And people are like, why are you doing? Why don't you do it on the weekend? I said, you go to the doctor on a Wednesday morning, right? Why don't you come to a forest therapy session? It's a little radical, but it's part of our thinking, right?
Well, and it's a shifting of priorities and thinking about, right, if you're able to take a morning off to go see your primary care provider, why can't you take a morning off to go see your primary care provider? Why can't you do that to engage in forest therapy?
Correct. Or a massage, or going to the acupuncturist, doing wellness things, having a nice meal. I mean, whatever means wellness to you. So, I continue to offer these practices in odd days that people just as a experiment, and to change our way of seeing things like this. And I also offer these on weekends for people who are maybe not ready to change their way of seeing things, but experimenting, and telling people this is something that might help you.
Yeah, and I want to just mention to people listening, because I think people who live in cities or really urban areas don't necessarily think about the green spaces around them as a place where they could go and enjoy the benefits of nature. And, I live in Philly. There are so many little green gems in our city that you can walk to, bike to, if you are able, drive to, that are not that far and that can provide that natural benefit that we've been talking about. So I would encourage people, no matter where you are, to take some time, do some searching, and understand what parks and preserves and natural spaces are around you, because you don't need to drive 2 or 3 hours into the mountains to really gain the benefits of being in nature.
That's correct. And I also encourage people to do that, um, and explore, explore the options and the opportunities.
Well, Andrea, I love this conversation so much. Thank you for the work you're doing as a hospice nurse. Thank you for the work you're doing as an urban farmer. And thank you for the work you're doing as a forest nurse. I think it's just a tremendous opportunity to really introduce the benefits of being in nature and protecting nature in a way that we haven't really seen being led by nurses before. So thank you for that.
Thank you for having me.
All right, so I am joined today by my colleague, Elisa Klinger. She is the Director of Health Equity at the Center for Healthcare Transformation and Innovation. She's going to be joining me in this end conversation today because my colleague and co-host Angela is traveling, lucky duck. So today we're going to be talking about the episode with Andrea, and we sit on the Next Gen Council for an organization called Natural Lands. Natural Lands is a nonprofit organization that saves open spaces, cares for nature, and connects people to the outdoors in Eastern Pennsylvania and South Jersey. So I thought she would be a great person to have this end conversation with.
Thank you, Marian. Thanks very much.
I'd love to get your overall impressions on the conversation with Andrea, who just blew my mind in the work that she's doing in a variety of areas, both, and we'll talk about this sort of her full cycle starting in labor and delivery and now working in hospice, but even more so in the work she does as an urban farmer and her new company focused on forest nursing.
Well, I was just blown away by the innovation and the sort of radical approach that she's taking to providing care in her community. And she really got me thinking about many things associated with natural spaces and how natural spaces can have an impact on human health. I think one of the sort of more profound things that she got me thinking about was this idea of her work as being about transitions. And initially she was a labor and delivery nurse. Now she's a hospice nurse, and sort of thinking about readiness of humans for various phases of their lives. And I was really thinking about, or really struck by, this idea that I think often as humans we feel anxiety about transitions, and sometimes it's good anxiety, new partner, new baby, new dog, and that's all positive stress or positive anxiety. And sometimes we have a more sort of negative perspective on these changes and transitions in our lives. But I'm struck by going into natural spaces and being surrounded by kind of the inevitability of seasonal change, growth, death, blossoming, flowering, leaves falling, all of these kind of changes, and how quieting or calming that can be for humans who otherwise might have a maybe more kind of problematic perspective on transitions. So just this idea of being surrounded by spaces that are in flux and that are, constantly changing and reemerging and evolving, and how that exposure can be quieting for our minds that are going a mile a minute and sort of thinking about the next.
Yeah, for sure. And, we talked about or we talked about some of the benefits of being in nature. There's so many others, but this decrease in anxiety and depression, you know, increase in joy and happiness just from being connected in nature, I think is a real benefit to encouraging people to use these spaces more. And I know, from what the work we do on the Next Gen Council of Natural Lands, we're really looking to increase those access points for folks who don't always have access to these natural spaces. And so to be able to take what Andrea is doing as a forest nurse and bring people into these spaces so that they can reap the benefits is so vitally important.
No, agreed. And I think there's the element of going into the space, but then also having some of those elements of natural spaces kind of coming to the people. And so, some of our work in natural lands has been about that, about sort of making places that might feel or seem inaccessible to folks, making that sort of more permeable or accessible in various ways. And, that could take the form of more accessible trails or connecting people to spaces, but then it could also be in the form of, encouraging people to have green spaces in the places where they work, or having, a small garden, or having, even flower pots or container gardens on a patio in a city that can kind of bring some level of enjoyment and sort of tangible experience with the natural world, that I think does invite a sense of calm, a sense of peace, a sense of well-being that I think people are really searching for in the world today.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I am so fortunate. I live in the city, but we have a fairly decent sized backyard for the city. And over the past couple of years, we've really worked to change that into this wildflower oasis where I take advantage every day being able to go outside, even for 5 or 10 minutes, and just enjoy the beauty that is being blossomed in our little city backyard with wildflowers and birds and bees and squirrels and everything that nature brings when you feed it, when you give it what it needs to thrive. And
Absolutely.
this brings me to the conversation back to Andrea in terms of how we're connected and how we view nature when we get a chance to interact with it, and how that relationship is really nature gives us so much, but we also have to protect and give back to nature. And I'd love to get your thoughts a little bit about that, and how, if we're really going to be able to protect these natural resources and natural lands, we have to have more people being exposed to the wonders that they bring.
There's something very abstract in a way. It's very tangible, but there's also something very abstract about thinking about making the connection sometimes, that, like, to me, and probably to you, it feels like, duh, like this is all good for human health, but I'm not sure that everybody understands it that way. And so,
No, I don't think they do. And which is why I think what Andrea is doing is super important.
yeah.
To be able to, as a nurse especially, bring those two aspects of health and environmental connectedness together
Hmm.
in a way that, I mean, I said this in the podcast episode, I don't think many nurses or providers are doing right now. And to your point, we
Yeah.
need it more than ever.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's really, really interesting. It's interesting to think about how important it is, especially for people like, I think you and I are probably very used to being out in natural spaces, but I realize that it's scary, or it feels inaccessible for people who haven't had those opportunities. And so having like a guide, or having, somebody there to kind of help you with the experience to sort of settle into your five senses. I think that's really, really an interesting idea.
For sure. And I said this in the episode, but that crazy stat that we spend as humans 90% of our time indoors now, which
Yeah.
historically in the past was not true. And I don't have the research to back this up, but I would imagine as anxiety, stress, depression
Yeah.
increases, there's an inverse relationship there, right? Like our time spent outside has been decreasing. And so trying to find that balance to get it back.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a lot about how in natural lands, for example, we have land preserves. And so it's been pointed out that a preserve is kind of inherently different from a park or a kind of more planned green space. And that's not to say that the preserves aren't planned in a sense as well, but there's something about a preserve being set aside in a way that is invites humans to enjoy the space, but that also is set aside just for the sake of it being set aside for plants and birds and animals and all of the natural wonder to sort of survive and thrive and flourish, irrespective of whether humans are there to see it or not. And so I think that that's also an important component. So it's both sort of thinking about accessibility and getting people into these spaces and getting people to experience firsthand or bringing some of that into people's lives, but then also on another level, thinking about allowing these spaces to flourish for their own benefit and for the sake of the environment on its own. So there's kind of a not a duality, but there's almost a like not all preserved space has to be necessarily accessible for humans, but there's something kind of quieting, at least in my mind, about thinking that while I'm sleeping, these preserves and these spaces are going about pumping out oxygen, and the foxes are running around and the birds are nesting and so forth. And there's something sort of wonderful about thinking that that's all happening while we're going about our daily lives, whether we're there to see it or not.
I love that thought so very much. And I think that's a perfect place to end this conversation. So thank you for all the work you do at the Center for Healthcare Transformation and Innovation, and also on the Natural Lands Next Gen Council.
Likewise, thank you so much, Marianne, for having me.
Amplify Nursing is hosted by Dr. Angela Rosa DiDonato and Marian Leary, and produced by the University of Pennsylvania School of Nursing, with special thanks to Jonathan Zhu for his assistance. Music for the podcast was created by Harper Leary. The podcast is made possible by the Krista and Rich Pinola Fund for Innovation in Nursing.
Follow us on Twitter at Penn Nursing. Until next time, keep pushing over, under, around, and through. We want to thank you for listening to the Amplify Nursing podcast and remind you to subscribe to the podcast on iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, iHeartRadio, or wherever you enjoy your podcast listening. And if you can do us a solid, please rate and review us as well. It will go a long way in amplifying our episodes.